Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we are really cutting through the noise of global affairs. We want to deliver the critical insights you need to understand, well, the interconnected chaos of international politics.
We really do. We've got a huge stack of sources today.
And they force us to grapple with three fascinating and honestly often contradictory themes. We've got high-stakes diplomacy happening behind closed doors, active military and naval aggression, and then this truly frustrating reality of global law enforcement, where the mechanisms are just failing under stress.
That's exactly right. Our mission today is to give you context by, connecting events that seem totally disparate.
Right.
We're going from, say, controversial peace proposals in North America to the judicial fate of a former president in South America, and then all the way to these weird, unexpected loopholes in maritime law that are actually protecting sanctioned oil tankers.
So the core tension we're looking at, it seems to be this agonizing balance between setting maximum political and economic pressure,
Which the U.S. is definitely doing.
and then the complete inability of global institutions to actually enforce any of it.
That's the heart of it.
Okay, let's jump straight in. The biggest source of friction, of course.
Yeah.
The Russia-Ukraine conflict. What stands out to me immediately are the completely contradictory signals coming out of the West. It's just bouncing between potential peace deals and, aggressive escalation.
Well, what's fascinating here is all the discussion around this Witkoff-Dmitriev 28-point plan.
Okay.
This is a controversial proposal that reportedly emerged after some private meetings in Miami. And just to give you context, Witkoff is a major real estate developer, a friend of President Trump.
Right.
And Dmitriev is a fund manager, sort of a political operative with Russian ties. So these are not official government diplomats.
That distinction is so crucial. So it's hard to know how seriously to take it. But the reported demands, they sound like Moscow's ideal preconditions.
Absolutely. Our sources say the draft plan calls for Kyiv to give up significant territory in the Donbass that it still controls.
And it still controls a lot of it.
It does. And on top of that, drastically reduce the size of its armed forces and its weapons inventory.
And we have to emphasize, Ukrainian officials weren't even in the room for this, right?
Reportedly not involved at all. And President Zelensky has repeatedly, flatly ruled out any territorial concessions.
Meanwhile, you see these dynamics shifting inside the White House. The special envoy for Ukraine, Keith Kellogg, is confirmed to be leaving his post in January.
And that personnel shift is being read as a huge political signal. Kellogg was seen as a key institutional advocate for robust military aid to Kyiv.
Especially when President Trump was often seen as being, let's say, too soft on Moscow.
Exactly. So his departure suggests a potential weakening of that whole Ukraine support structure right as this controversial plan is floating around.
But the Kremlin's reaction was, what?
Almost silent.
Very muted.
Yeah. Spokesman Dmitry Peskov just downplayed the reports, referring only to the spirit of Anchorage.
The spirit of Anchorage, for anyone who doesn't remember, that refers to the previous Putin-Trump summit.
Right. And that spirit implies this desire for a comprehensive diplomatic reset, a grand bargain. It suggests Moscow sees this plan as part of a much larger, longer-term strategic opening.
It's a classic carrot-stick scenario. But the stick being wielded by the U.S. Congress is absolutely enormous.
It is. So regardless of whether this peace plan is real or not, the administration seems determined to maintain maximum leverage. And this brings us to that sanctions paradox you mentioned.
Okay, so talk me through it.
Well, we have Senator Lindsey Graham reporting that the White House approved a major new sanctions bill, and critically, that President Trump personally asked for it to be advanced in Congress.
So even with these whispers of peace deals, the pressure is not easing up one bit.
Not at all. And this is where the specific power of this bill becomes truly strategic. It allows the president to levy a massive, and I mean massive, 500% tariff on imports from any country that buys Russian uranium, gas, or oil.
Wow. Okay, that's a game changer. It forces countries to choose between cheap Russian energy and access to the U.S. market.
And Senator Graham was very direct about the goal here. He said there can be no successful plan unless Putin genuinely believes that military support for Ukraine will continue and that those buying cheap Russian resources will be aggressively pursued.
So this isn't just punishment. It's a tool of economic coercion. It's designed to literally reshape global energy trade.
Precisely.
So we have this diplomatic carrot, this potential peace plan, paired with a 500% tariff stick. But while that economic war is raging, we have to look at the physical aggression, the stuff that continues to test NATO borders, specifically this naval brinkmanship near the UK.
This involves the Russian vessel Yantar, Russia says it's a civilian oceanic research vessel.
But the UK and NATO allies see it as a spy ship, pure and simple.
They do. The fundamental concern, and this has been going on for years, is that the Yantar has been systematically mapping Britain's vital undersea infrastructure.
And we're not talking about abstract things here. This is foundational global civilian infrastructure. These cables transfer over 90% of global data, trillions of dollars in financial transactions every day.
If they were severed or even just disabled, the global economy would just grind to a halt.
Yeah.
So this kind of reconnaissance, it isn't just testing NATO resolve, it's an active threat. It's low-grade warfare targeting global connectivity.
And what makes the latest report so concerning is that the Yantar sailors allegedly targeted Royal Air Force pilots in their patrol planes with lasers.
That crosses a dangerous threshold. UK Defense Secretary John Healey called it deeply dangerous. It's a direct physical escalation. It's not passive surveillance anymore.
So what was the response?
Healey's public response was incredibly sharp, just direct. He said, "We see you, we know what you're doing." And he implied a very swift military response if the Yantar crosses that 12-mile maritime boundary.
And it fits a pattern, right? We've seen drone incursions, warplanes entering Estonian skies.
Exactly. But targeting foundational data cables and military pilots, that's a strategic step up in brinkmanship.
Let's use that aggression as a bridge to the next segment. The global economic war against Russia's shadow fleet of oil tankers. Because this is where we run headfirst into the baffling limitations of international law.
Indeed. The EU is drafting measures. It's part of their 20th sanctions package, aimed not just at the ships themselves, but at the entities, the flag states that issue registration to these tankers.
The idea being to destroy the legality of their operation.
Right. And diplomatic work has reportedly been largely successful in convincing these flag states to pull the registration from the vessels.
Which sounds like a huge win for the sanctions regime.
It is a victory for diplomatic pressure. But this brings us to the real aha moment about maritime law. Aggressive enforcement, like actually confiscating the ships, is incredibly difficult. And that's because of a foundational legal structure, the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, UNCLS.
So NCLS, which was designed for freedom of commerce, is now paradoxically protecting sanctioned vessels.
It is. As long as a ship holds a valid registration, even one they got fraudulently, it's entitled to freedom of navigation. You can only detain it if it lacks a flag entirely or is, provably using a false one.
Which is how Estonia and France managed to detain that one vessel, the Koala, right?
The Koala, which they later renamed the Boracay. Yes, but, and this is the key point, even then, confiscation is nearly impossible.
But wait, I have to ask. If the EU knows these ships are carrying sanctioned oil, and they know the registrations are dodgy, why can't they just confiscate them? They're waging an economic war. Why let them sail away?
This is the critical legal constraint. Maritime law experts are clear on this. If the vessel pays a fine for whatever infraction they find and it undergoes technical inspections to get permission to sail, the authorities must release it.
So, if I'm hearing you right, it's like a police officer pulls over a known getaway car, finds the driver for a broken taillight, but then has to let the getaway car just drive off.
That is essentially the conundrum under UNCLOS, and the global risk of changing that rule unilaterally is just too high. Well, think about it. If the EU confiscates one of these vessels, other major maritime states like China or Russia could instantly reciprocate. They could start confiscating European or American vessels, citing their own justifications. The whole foundation of free navigation would collapse.
Wow. So the system seems almost structurally ruined by this fraudulent registration and flag hopping, as our sources call it.
It is. Experts believe the only real long-term fix would be a new IMO convention. That's the International Maritime Organization.
But that would require consensus among over 175 states. That sounds slow.
Excruciatingly slow. And what really stands out in our sources is the prediction that effective measures will likely only be spurred by a major environmental disaster.
You mean from one of these old, unmaintained shadow fleet tankers?
Exactly. If one of them has a massive spill near the coast of a wealthy, influential country, the idea is that crisis, not diplomacy, is what might finally force a reform.
That is a chilling assessment of global governance. Let's shift gears. Let's go to the global political stage, where we're seeing these major international events defined by strategic absences and some very personal acts of accountability.
We're focused on the G20 summit in South Africa. This was a big deal, the first one ever held in Africa. But The event was just fundamentally undermined by the absence of two critical
The
figures,
most immediate drama was the U.S. absence, led by President Trump. He cited alleged discrimination against South Africa's white farmers as the reason.
which President Ramaphosa vehemently called completely false.
Right. And not only did the U.S. boycott, they urged other member nations not to adopt a leader's declaration. That's the symbolic document that signals multilateral consensus.
So the U.S. boycott alone just hampered the G20's ability to act as a unified body. But then there's the other major absence, President Putin.
He couldn't attend because of the ICC arrest warrant.
Exactly. South Africa is a signatory to the Rome Statute, which legally obliges them to arrest Putin if he sets foot on their territory.
So you have this perfect illustration of global tension. The head of the world's most powerful economy boycotts for political reasons, while the head of a major opposing force is constrained by international law.
And South African Foreign Minister Ronald Lamola sort of captured the mood with a sharp comment. He suggested the world can and will move on without the U.S.
And what was the takeaway from other observers?
Well, the Open Society Foundations noted that this whole situation just underscores the urgent need to accelerate global governance reform, to make sure African nations and others have a meaningful voice, not just the nations that decide to show up.
From multilateral politics, let's look at accountability in its most personal form. Political justice in Brazil. Former President Jair Bolsonaro is expected to be incarcerated.
Yeah, following his 27-year sentence for trying to, and this is the quote, annihilate democratic institutions.
This is a huge moment for Brazil, especially given his past rhetoric about prisoners. His allies are worried about him going to the maximum security Papuda prison. They're citing these awful conditions like 40 inmates per cell.
They claim the environment would just break his health.
The irony is pretty sharp. But our sources indicate he's more likely headed to a facility for special prisoners, nicknamed Papudinha, or Little Papuda.
And the details of Papudinha, I mean, they really underscore the difference. We're talking cells of about 24 square meters with a bathroom and a veranda. They'd even be allowed a donated TV and a minibar.
A minibar,
Yeah.
okay. So that is a far cry from the conditions his allies were describing.
A very far cry. And it perfectly frames the political debate. On one side, allies are calling it the greatest political injustice.
And on the other.
On the other, you have someone like Congressman Otoni, who sees the jailing of a former president as a crucial affirmation of Brazilian democracy. The insight here is that for a fragile democracy like Brazil's, this verdict asserts that no one is above the law, not even a former president.
A necessary demonstration of judicial independence.
A powerful statement indeed.
Okay, let's use our remaining time for a quick sweep of other global flashpoints. We have a pretty significant development regarding extremism in the occupied West Bank.
Yes. The U.S. ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee, openly labeled violent attacks by Israeli extremists there as terrorism.
That's a big deal.
Yeah.
The U.S. government usually reserves that term for, recognized terrorist organizations. To use it for settlers is a serious escalation in condemnation.
He did try to qualify it a bit. He noted that he believes these acts are carried out by a very small number, describing them as angry youth or thugs, many of whom he claims don't even live in Judea and Samaria.
But regardless of the number, the Trump administration's concern here is how this violence impacts the diplomatic efforts to end the Gaza conflict. It's a massive source of tension.
Absolutely.
Moving quickly over to Japan, we have reports of a devastating fire in Oita City.
A very serious incident. The blaze damaged or burned down at least 170 homes. It killed one person and forced a lot of evacuations.
And the firefighting was hampered by what, two main factors?
Yeah, strong winds when the fire started, and then the local geography, just narrow back streets and old wooden houses. It's an aging neighborhood.
So a combination of bad luck and vulnerable infrastructure.
Leading to tragedy, yeah.
And finally, a fascinating cultural connection to wrap us up. The famous Russian nesting dolls, the matryoshka.
It's a great little detail, right? A perfect example of cultural lines blurring. While we think of them as quintessentially Russian, many are actually produced in Yimianpo, China.
How far from the border?
Only about 125 miles. This whole production tradition followed the expansion of the Russian Empire's rail lines into China back in the late 19th century. Commerce just overriding political boundaries.
We have covered a tremendous amount of ground today. We saw this intense complexity of trying to pursue a diplomatic endgame in Ukraine, while at the same time launching maximum economic pressure with that 500% tariff threat.
And all of it is happening while international laws, like UNCLS, are actively being leveraged to protect the very people engaged in the conflict. It really highlights a structural failure of global governance.
So if we connect this back to the bigger picture, what's the through line?
I think what stands out across all these sources is the consistent and sometimes contradictory influence of the U.S. administration, whether it's driving aggressive sanctions, trying to manage extremism in the West Bank, or strategically boycotting the G20. The administration's fingerprints are on every single flashpoint.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? Here's a final provocative thought to reflect on. If the systems designed for global freedom, like the freedom of navigation guaranteed by YEC-NAGS, are being exploited so successfully by hostile actors, how quickly must global governance institutions adapt?
Hmm.
Is it even possible for institutions like the IMO to reform before a catastrophe, like that predicted environmental disaster from the Shadow Fleet, forces the very change they're currently delaying? It feels like a race between legal inertia and a looming crisis.
A stark realization of the costs of inaction.
Until next time.